My name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Innovation Showcase. The main purpose of this ongoing series is to inform views about exciting innovations and creative individuals across the fields of business, science, technology, education, and the arts. Today, via Zoom, we're extremely fortunate to have as our guests twin brothers, Eric and Matthew Gilbertson. Eric and Matthew are mechanical engineers and elite mountaineers who are on a mission to climb and precisely measure the highest mountain in every country on Earth. During the program, we'll find out why and how this groundbreaking scientific endeavor came about and how it's grown, developed, and operates today. In the process, we'll come to better understand and appreciate how the Gilbertsons have uncovered Evers and long accepted elevation records, redefining national high points and challenging how we understand geography on our ever-changing planet. Let's start by meeting Eric and Matthew and then hearing all about their extraordinary undertaking. Welcome. So delighted you're both able to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Jay, for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's been fascinating following your travels. So eager to hear more and have you inform viewers. But before we jump right to that, I think it would be of interest if each of you would just briefly add a little bit more to your background, perhaps academic, professional interest. Eric, would you start, please?
Yeah, I'm currently a teaching professor at Seattle University in Seattle, Washington, in mechanical engineering. And as part of my work, I do research and publish papers about measuring mountains.
Wonderful, wonderful. Matthew, a few words about yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm a mechanical engineer at Lockheed Martin Space, so I design spacecraft that take pictures of the sun and tell us how the sun works, tell us when solar storms are headed our way.
Fabulous, fabulous. Moving on to finding out about your extraordinary explorations, many people, just assume that mountain heights are settled facts. I know I did until really finding out about what you've been doing. What surprised you most when you began comparing official records with your own measurements?
I can take that. So I was probably most surprised when we both started looking into the Saudi Arabia high point. So this was in 2018. And before then, I kind of thought when you see a number on a map for a mountain, that's completely accurate, no error. That's just what the number is. But then when researching this, we wanted to be certain that we climbed the right mountain because in 2018, it was really hard to get a visa to go to Saudi Arabia. So I started doing some research and I found old Soviet and old US military surveys, and one had one mountain, Jabal Sauda, the tallest, and the other has another mountain, Jabal Farwa, the tallest. So they couldn't both be right. So this got me thinking, okay, those numbers must have errors on them. It's not 100% accurate. And then we also looked at satellite measurements and they had them exactly tied. So this kind of surprised me that the number you see on a map or in sources is not necessarily 100% accurate, and there are error bounds on that. And just because one number on a map that says one map says one mountain is the highest in the country doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate.
Fascinating breakthrough in that understanding. Can one of you walk us through what it's like to take all the equipment that you need, all these serving equipment and other things, to mountains that are in remote areas, and then just what you'd have to do to go about collecting the data? Please.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So the main tool we use is called a differential GNSS receiver. It's like a really fancy version of what you have in your phone, but it's heavier and you have to set it there for a longer amount of time. And generally what we try to do is bring a tripod in there and mount this device on the tripod on the summit, and then collect data that satellites send down and collect data for ideally at least an hour.
Mm.
And this equipment, I have ultralight versions and then heavier versions. The heaviest version can be maybe 20 or 30 pounds for everything. Sometimes I need multiple of these. that tends to be difficult if it's a technical peak. Now I have a lighter version, it's maybe 5 or 10 pounds, that if it's a technical rock climb, I'll try to bring that up there. Kind of depends on the survey. So like this mountain in Uzbekistan, when I went to survey the highest mountain there, it was 20 miles in and it was like a 7 pitch technical rock climb. So I don't want to be hauling 30 pounds up there.
Hmm.
But then like in the US, I do a lot of surveys of Mount Rainier. And I want that to be like down to the millimeter as accurate as I can get. So then I'm willing to haul up like 50 pounds or even more equipment there.
Fabulous, fabulous. I mean, just the care and attention you have to do, in addition to the incredible challenge of the climbing. What an undertaking. Just incredible to even think about. Um, one related project that's been fascinating to follow online, highly recommended to viewers and others, and we'll have the link in the credits, is the project you've been doing, Country High Points. One of you please just share a little bit about how that came about and how it's developed over time, please?
Yeah, I could take that maybe. We start out. Yeah, we started out as kids, trying to visit with our family as many states as possible. Like we go out of our way to, touch our toe in Nebraska, for example. And so we kind of liked visiting places that were part of a list. So then we went to school at MIT, and then we started climbing the highest mountains in New Hampshire, so the 4,000 footers in New Hampshire, and there's 48 of those. And so we kind of got excited, about working on these lists. We started working on the U.S. state high points, finished that. We'd done Denali, so that's the hardest of the state high points, and of course, country high point too. So then it just kind of snowballed from there. We started thinking, okay, where can we continue working on these lists? And so we continued traveling outside of U.S., traveling to other countries, and climbing the highest point there. And so that's kind of how the project has grown over the years.
Matthew, before we enjoy some wonderful images related to your travels, when did you and Eric realize that this was becoming more of a cartographic mission than just mountaineering?
So it probably started with Saudi Arabia, like Eric mentioned. Before that, we had just kind of assumed that all the mountain heights were fixed, like Eric was saying, and we'd just read about it online of what's the highest mountain, and so then we'd go and visit it. But yeah, as Eric mentioned, as we started, working harder and harder to get to some of these remote places and get permission, we wanted to be absolutely sure that we got to the highest point. And so that's kind of motivated us to be more rigorous and do more rigorous research and more rigorous measurements to make sure that, well, we don't have to go back again.
Matthew, we're fortunate you've assembled some wonderful images from the site that shares some of the places, some of the variety of expeditions, challenges that you've undertaken. Now would be a great time to segue, if you would, and share with us some of those images and accomplishments that the two of you have achieved so far.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. See, how's that coming through?
Very good.
Okay.
Perfect. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, so here's kind of a summary of the projects and the progression that I mentioned. So, we started out working on the high New Hampshire 4,000 footers, and then we worked on the state high points. That's this image on the upper right. And then we started working on the country high points. And so the country high points, we've got this map here where we've tried to kind of color code all the countries, 196 countries in the world, based upon, uh, cl whether we've climbed the high point, and that's in blue, the countries that we've just visited but haven't climbed the high point, they're in red, and then the whitish countries are ones that we haven't visited. And then there's some gray areas where, for example, like Denmark owns Greenland, and so the actual highest point of Danish territory is technically on Greenland, but
Ah,
we've done the high point in Denmark. So, there are some technicalities here of some of the peaks, like Australia. Has an island in the South Indian Ocean that has the actual highest point, although some consider the highest point to be on the mainland. So anyhow, some technicalities there. But yeah, we try to be rigorous as I mentioned before and try to Um, try to be safe. That's the number one priority. So we've gotten 152 country high points so far. So here's kind of a collage of some of them at least. So there's, many snowy peaks, many peaks with jungles, many peaks in the desert, some peaks where you can just drive up to the top of. So we thought we might consider some subsets. So for example, here's some jungle bushwhacks. Not all the peaks are tall and snowy. There's many peaks like in the Caribbean or, in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific that require a lot of jungle bushwhacking. So, for example, St. Kitts and Nevis, it's a volcanic mountain, and the high point's on one side of it, so you got to go around this bushwhack through the jungle. You can see, Eric, you want to talk about maybe a couple on here?
Yeah, Brunei is very challenging bushwhack in the jungle. That one, it took me 9 hours to just cover 1 mile to get to the summit. And we
Wow.
actually ran out of water. But then on the summit, there were pitcher plants that had water in them. And so that's how we survived on that one.
Mm, fascinating.
Yeah, many other peaks in the Caribbean, like Grenada with Razor Grass, St. Lucia, Dominica, St. Vincent. And then maybe in the interest of time, I can kind of flip to some of the other ones, like in the desert, for example, Jordan High Point there is in Wadi Rum, so it's near Petra, so you get to see this really cool, iconic place, and this is where a bunch of movies have been filmed. And then, Kuwait, Bahrain, those are all in the Middle East. There's many countries, their highest point is also a favorable like military location, so it's sometimes tricky to get to the top of those countries. So Qatar is one of those such places, Bahrain as well. So in in our in our case, you might get lucky on the day you visit, and the kind of the guards that are protecting the area let you in, or they don't
Mm,
mind, and other times they don't let you in. So it's kind of sometimes up to the whims of whoever's guarding the area, whether you're allowed to climb the high point or not.
mhm.
So those are some of the desert peaks, and then many of them are what we call politically spicy. So you can imagine it's not super easy for Americans to visit Cuba, but at least when we did it, there were ways that we could get a visa. Israel, military, Israel, Oman, Bahrain, all kind of military complexes. Central
Mm,
African Republic, Eric, you might want to mention that one. That one.
Yeah, that one, they hadn't seen foreigners for like the past 15 years when my friend and I showed up. And they
wow.
told us no permission. But we negotiated with them for a while. And eventually they said, okay, if this one military guy and this one policeman go with you, then you can climb it. So they scrambled through this little chimney with us with their guns, and they got to the top too. So not
Fabulous.
too easy.
Yeah, some of these other peaks here, like Nicaragua, has landmines, so you want to make sure to hire a guide and walk directly behind the guide. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, Belize,
Wow.
it's in a kind of remote part of the jungle, so you have to have like a kind of armed escort. And then there are many that we call stealth missions. So we go in and try to get to the top quickly and then get out of there. It's like Bahrain doing that at night. Nigeria, Eric, you want to maybe touch on that
Yeah,
one?
we had to. Yeah, for that one, we took motorcycles at night to uh, get to the get to the trailhead without anyone giving us any trouble. So a little bit stealthy. Turkmenistan did that one at night, so no one got mad at us. The high points a lot of times are on country borders because that's where the highest mountains are. So sometimes they're uh, a little bit contested areas.
Gee, just hearing about it, I can imagine just the adrenaline rush you get through whether it's these incredible expeditions, trying to dodge political individuals, and just climbing them. What a rush, I'm sure it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's excitement that you get from the terrain, excitement from just going fast and light and trying to get to the peak before anybody gets upset. And then there's many with spicy weather, as you can imagine. There's plenty of peaks with snow, like uh, High Point in Canada. We're stuck in a blizzard for 3 days, and you can see all the snow that's drifted. Everest was the weather was really spicy up there. I wasn't able to make it to the top. Neither was Eric. We had to turn around really
Mm.
close to the top just due to conditions. And then some countries of that may be a little corrupt, they often like demand bribes, and we try not to pay them if we can avoid it. But sometimes there's no way to get through like a border or a situation without like um, giving them the money that they ask for. So it's an unfortunate truth with mountains, but that's definitely the case. Usually, once we get to the trailhead and we can just, you know, once it's just us versus the mountain, everything's fine. But getting to the trailhead's often the hard part.
Mm.
Many of them are really easy to get to. Like you can just drive to the top, or you can, just walk to the top.
Wow.
Barbados, Belarus, Belgium, we biked up, Belgium biked to the top. So these are nice. And then some of them, of course, are challenging expeditions like the ones listed here.
Mm.
Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. Eric's done the highest mountains in all of the stands. I don't know
Wow.
if you want to talk about that for a second, Eric.
Yeah, these are some of the most challenging country high points in the world are all the stand countries. Like Kyrgyzstan took maybe 6 weeks to acclimate fully and then climb the mountain. So mega
Wow.
expedition.
Incredible.
And then Canada is like took like 3 weeks. Afghanistan takes like 3 weeks. So it generally takes longer when you have to acclimate. Got to work your way slowly up the mountain, and then they'll have long approaches too, and you often have to wait a long time for good weather. So like for K2, I was like ready to go, and maybe you have to wait like 10 days until you get a weather window.
Mm.
It's very important for these high altitude peaks.
And then there's many that are technical rock and ice climbs. Eric, he's between the two of us, he's definitely the most proficient with these sorts of peaks. I don't know if there's any comments that you wanted to add about these peaks, Eric.
Yeah, like Kenya, the route we did on Mount Kenya was like a 20 pitch rock climb, very technical. Uzbekistan, like 7 pitches of rock. Georgia, a lot of ice climbing. Kyrgyzstan, a lot of ice climbing, mixed climbing. So these tend to be some of the hardest country high points, the ones that require ropes. They're also some of the most interesting, I would say.
And then there's many peaks that are kind of somewhere in the middle where they're just a regular hike. So we had a lot of fun climbing Mount Washington, for example, in New Hampshire when we lived in New
Mm.
England. And many of these are comparable to that. You just get to the trailhead, you hike to the top. It's a good day hike. Um, so for example, like Jamaica, Czech Republic, Norway, Morocco. Morocco's in Africa, but still it gets snow. That's what's one of the things that surprised us. Panama, you can bike up to the top. Ukraine at that time, when we visited, it was easy. It was easy to get to the top. Nowadays might not be so easy, but yeah, these are I think some of our favorites because there's not a lot of red tape. You don't need to hire a guide. Just kind of show up and hike the mountain. So that's kind of it for, overviews of many of the peaks. Be happy to go into more detail if
That's fabulous. And I just have to say, the way both of you have documented your travels is incredible on the website. Both these wonderful images together with the commentary that you provide. I mean, all the time that aspect of your work takes is incredibly noteworthy. And again, call the attention to country high points for people to enjoy and find out much more about the project you've been involved with and are still involved with. Moving on for a few more questions. How do local governments and even scientific institutions typically react when you present contradictory data to their quote unquote official records?
I can talk about this one. It kind of depends on the country. So, for instance, Saudi Arabia, we took the measurements with the Saudi Climbing Federation. They were helping us out, and they recognized the measurements. And also in Colombia, I discovered a new country high point there, and I sent my data and a technical document to the lead glaciologist in the country, and
Mm.
he agrees with the data and recognizes it. But then other countries, they're not as uh, not as quick to recognize. So, for instance, Uzbekistan, I've written that those measurements up in a scientific journal article, and it's been published. And I've sent that to the Cartography Institute there, but they kind of just ignore it. So it kind of can go one way or can go another. Even in the US, the USGS is like the governing body that would be in charge of this. So when I've taken measurements like Mount Rainier, I've discovered it's melted down like 20 feet in the past 20 years or so. But then I try to contact USGS, but they don't really care. So they just say they're not responsible for updating peak elevations. So I think the only way to make this like somewhat official, these measurements we take, is to publish them in scientific journals. That's about as
Mm.
good as we can get. And then governments can do what they want with it. So that's basically what we do. Basically, all the measurements are now in scientific journals.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is that there is not a mechanism for making these updates is that, like we talked about at the beginning, I mean, most people think that mountain heights are fixed, everything's already been surveyed, and that's all set. So if we had been doing this maybe 50 years ago, maybe it'd be easier to get into the pipeline of like updating maps and things like that. But everything's kind of nowadays has sort of been set in stone, and it's hard to change it.
How do both of you hope? What do you hope your work will influence, say, future climbers, scientists, or map makers?
I think part of the reason that we document these trips so thoroughly is in the hope that it'll help other people to get to the tops eventually. And then, one of the reasons we survey these peaks is so that we can know which peaks are at the real summits, so that others can sort of benefit from that and not have to visit a few different mountains and do the measurements themselves. So those are a few outcomes that we hope
Mhm.
from the
So
work.
scientifically, we've discovered some mountains have melted down due to climate change. So, for instance, in Colombia, I surveyed these two mountains, Bolivar and Colon. And they're both ice cap peaks, but they'd last been surveyed in 1939. So I surveyed them in 2024, and I found they each melted down over 50 meters. And
Wow.
actually, the Colon used to be the high point, but it melted down even more than Bolivar, and now Bolivar is the country high point. So it has a new country high point, and maybe even more importantly, these mountains melted down 50 meters. So, and that's not unique. So in the US used to have five ice cap peaks in the contiguous US, the lower 48 states. And I've discovered there are now only two that have permanent ice on the summit. The others have
Mm.
melted down 20, 30 feet. And Rainier has melted down 20 feet. And it's pretty soon the Columbia Crest, the old summit, is going to melt down to rock in another 15 years or so. So hopefully
Mm.
scientists can benefit from this knowledge and maybe be motivated to start studying other mountains that have ice cap summits to see how they're changing too.
Most definitely, most definitely. Looking ahead, is there a country or peak still ahead that either feels maybe particularly daunting or that you're really looking forward to exploring?
I would say the most difficult one remaining is probably Burma or Myanmar, the high point. That's difficult for and interesting for many reasons. First of all, it's actually not known which is the highest mountain. There are these two ice cap peaks that are each about 20,000 feet, but they haven't been surveyed carefully enough to know which one's taller. So it's interesting from a surveying perspective. They're also very technical and they're very deep in the jungle and a high altitude. And it's currently politically difficult to get in there after the coup happened. So that one has all the challenges you could imagine, and it's also the most interesting one, I think, remaining.
When future generations look at maps corrected by your work, what do you hope they understand about exploration, science, and our ever-evolving planet?
I think one thing they should get out of it is that there's a lot of there are a lot of things that are still not known about mountains around the world. There are actually still a lot of mountains that haven't been climbed, many that have never been surveyed. And even if they have been surveyed, there's maybe error in the numbers. So there's still uncertainty out there. There's still a lot of new discoveries that could potentially be made. Any ice cap peaks around the world, they're probably melting down, but no one really knows because hardly any of them have been measured. So there's still a lot of exploration and discovery to be had in mountains around the world.
Has this project so far changed the way either of you sort of personally experienced being on top of a summit of a mountain now?
I would say I spend a lot more time on the summit now because if I need to stay there for an hour or a couple hours to collect data, that's a really good excuse to enjoy the summit more than I used to just tag it and go down. But also, I think when surveying a mountain, it's kind of like you're discovering something new each time. So that's in addition to just getting to the summit, but now you're figuring something out that no one knew before. So that makes it even more fulfilling, I would say.
Terrific. What are some of your current and upcoming efforts, if you could give us a glimpse of where you'll be going in the near future?
You can
I can
start out,
start.
and then after that, I'll add a little.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm currently in Africa. I'm working on climbing 10 or so country high points that are in season now in the dry season. So I just got back from I did Brazil in early January and then I came to Africa and did Sierra Leone, Liberia, and I'm currently in Benin. And Benin has two candidates for the high point and it's not certain which one is higher. So I'm going to survey and figure that out. And then I'll kind of work my way through a few more countries in Africa by the end of
Mhm.
February.
Yeah, and then for me, well, we try to do as many peaks as we can together, but Eric, his schedule allows him to travel a lot more than me, so he's pretty far ahead in this project. But for me, yeah, I've got two young kids, and I'm hoping to bring them to,
Ah,
me and my wife bring them to Europe this summer, and then I'll be able to finish off the 47 peaks there with Croatia. That one's, probably can get the kids up there, so that'll be a kind of a special celebration, the whole
oh,
family.
fantastic, fantastic. In closing, how can viewers and others keep informed about your adventures and possibly get in touch?
For the most up to date, they can follow us on Instagram at Twins to the Tops. And for more detailed information, they can go to countryhighpoints.com and then we write detailed reports for every mountain we climb and survey.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we'll be sure to put those bits of information in our closing credits, which unfortunately we've come to the end of the program. Like, again, I want to thank both of you so much for taking the time to be here. Fascinating to find out even more about your project and undertakings and accomplishments. And just want to close by wishing you continued success with future endeavors.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to share our story.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Wonderful. Also want to thank those of you watching for joining us and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.